Hello. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to this post-screening event of Home in E Major, and in particular to this conversation between the film's director, Tamar Rakowski, and the academic and film curator, Kim Knowles. My name is Janet McCabe and I teach at Birkbeck, but I am also part of the curating collective at the SA Film Festival. Home in E Major was originally scheduled to show at the festival back in March, before the world changed and everyone retreated into their homes for our spring hibernation. 6 months have elapsed and I'm delighted to say we've now had the opportunity to show Home in E Major, this first-person essay film about unlikely friendships, and where its central themes of home, what it means to find a home away from home, have taken on fresh resonance. Two principal indicators of the essay film, according to Lara Rascaroli, are reflectiveness and subjectivity. Films that generate in the spectator a sense of an essay, where a filmmaker expresses some kind of musing, a meditation on an issue, offering a highly personal, careful and thought-provoking reflection on a topic. And our conversation this evening will take as its starting point how the film engages us in an open dialogue about home and identity and the interaction between strangers. Before introducing Kim and Tamar, I extend warm thanks to Bertha DocHouse for helping us stage this evening and for helping us present Home in E Major in collaboration with the SA Film Festival and Birkbeck Institute of the Moving Image. I'd particularly like to thank Sean Pennell at DocHouse for his help in facilitating this online event this evening and for helping me moderate the chat. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to post them in the chat that's streaming as part of this service, where they will be moderated, and I, as chair, will feed as many of these questions in as possible during the conversation. So it now gives me great pleasure to introduce Tamara Rakowski and Kim Knowles. Tamar is a documentary filmmaker and she holds an MFA from the Experimental and Documentary Arts program at Duke University in the States. Originally from Jerusalem, she is the daughter of immigrants from the former USSR. Her work focuses on the dynamics of identity, community, and space, both spiritually and physically. Filmed through the lens of personal stories, she's a filmmaker who literally inhabits the text of her films. And then we have Kim, and Kim is a writer, a curator, and an academic lecturing in alternative and experimental film at Aberystwyth. She is the author of several works on the historical and contemporary forms of experimental filmmaking, and her book, Experimental Film and Photochemical Practices, has recently been published by Springer. In addition, she is the experimental film programmer for the Black Book Strand at the Edinburgh International Film Festival. So I welcome you both, and now I'd like to hand over to Kim, who will start our conversation.
Thanks, Janet. Yeah, it's actually, it was a really great pleasure to host the film at the Edinburgh Film Festival last year, which actually feels like an eternity ago. And the three of us talked about the possibility of Tamar coming to London, and we'd arranged for a sort of a mini UK tour, and all got very excited about that. And then, you know, current circumstances evolved, and we were all disappointed about the impossibility of coming together, because, well, you know, the film is also about coming together and personal connections, and I think we'd developed a kind of very strong bond around this film, so it felt quite devastating to not be able to do it in person, but then so exciting to be able to do it in a different format. And so, you know, I'm really happy to be talking to Tamar again, finally, about the film. And I think it's probably necessary to talk a little bit just for a second about how I encountered the film. So I visited Duke University, gosh, about two years ago now, I think it was, or a year and a half. I sort of lost track of time. And I did a studio visit with Tamar, and we watched the film together. And the three of us have talked about this quite a lot, and Tamar and I particularly, that I had a response to the film that I can't say I've ever had before with any other film. And the only way that I can describe that experience is that it shook me. I felt shaken. And, you know, I've been asking myself, did I feel sad? No. Did I feel emotional? No, it wasn't exactly that. And it's still to this day a feeling that I can't quite put my finger on. And the only way that I would be able to describe it is in terms of affect, you know, this sort of sense, this bodily reaction that one can't name, one can't put an emotion to. And so I wanted to ask you, Tamar, first of all, you know this story very well, and you saw my reaction at the time. And I think it's a reaction that many people have had. Did you have any idea when you were making this film, the kinds of emotions that it might stimulate in the audience? Where was the audience in your mind when you were making this film? Because it is a highly personal film, isn't it? It's very much about you and your experience, but where was the audience and the audience reaction in that process?
Thank you for the question. And maybe before I'll answer, I just want to say thank you for both for making this happen. I was also very much looking forward to coming to the UK and be together and presenting the film. So I'm just very happy that this is happening. And so I did it. You're not the first person who expressed this feeling about the film. And I think it very much goes together with how this film was made and the story behind it. Because originally I was planning to do a film that was a little bit different. The film originally was about the four tenants and about the idea of home and how the four of us live together. But the events changed, and there was a particular friendship that started with me and Elisabeth, and then my friend died, and then Elisabeth got ill, and then she went to the hospital, and then she died. And I found myself in the editing, also from very early stages of the editing, trying to think, but what is the story? What am I trying to say? What am I trying to share? How do you express something that is basically just a feeling? It's just an experience because it's a connection. So I had to shift from doing a film that is a narrative film that has a story, and I was trying to make a narrative that is an emotional narrative, that you go through an emotional experience through the film, and basically you go there. I wanted to share the emotional journey I went through. So I think this is why the film has this effect, because it takes you on the journey that I went through. So as we already spoke, the three of us before, I mean, you don't know basically anything about anyone. That was one of the biggest challenges in this film, is what is the minimum a viewer needs to know that he could be involved. And I think that was, when I was thinking about the viewer, I was always thinking about that, what is the minimum he needs to know to be part of this experience, to be part of the story. And because you just plug into the situation, but you don't get a lot of background. You don't know anything about me or anything about Elisabeth or Lee or Stuart. You just share some time together. And I guess that's why it also fits very well with the Essay Film Festival, because it's a little bit like a diary. It's very personal. I tell things, just moments. And when I was filming, already after Elisabeth passed away, I was all the time, even before, I was trying to think, what will I film? You know, I was in the room or in the house, and I was basically just collecting images. I was collecting images that meant something for me, and I hoped that I could be able to build it up and be able to screen it in the same way that I experience it, not in only the way that I saw it, but also in the same way that I experience it. And it was endless games in the editing just to try to, you know, play with everything, such as staring at the white wall, and you know, the different angles of the window, the different lights, just sometimes that it can be very shadow and sometimes that it can be very deep and cheerful. Just a collections of images that in the real life had a very load of emotion.
I think it's quite poetic in that respect, and I think a lot of the emotion comes through in those moments of stillness or emptiness where nothing seems to be happening, and I think that's what I found so emotionally affecting. Really, was the being in a situation, and you talked about coming together and personal interaction. And I think this is the essence of the film, really, is the simplicity of human connection, human contact. And it's that actually in a way that we're sort of missing right now in this COVID scenario. Not that we want to talk about that too much, but I think the film takes on an additional power. It becomes even more powerful in this moment because we see those sequences and we kind of yearn for that, or there's a sense of mourning. And I wonder if you've reflected on that, because you've been screening the film, I know, a couple of times in online settings, and I wondered how does this make you think differently about the film, or reflect differently about your experience in retrospect, the making of the film?
So I watched it today, a few hours ago again. After I didn't watch it for a long time. And what surprised me, and this is something that, we talked about recently, how these days when you watch films or you watch series, you're very shocked of the cultural life, the outside life. You're just like, wow, they're going to a bar and they're going, so many people in the street, and like they shop, and that suddenly becomes very exotic or very far away. So I think in that sense, watching the film today was very organic. I found myself, yeah, everybody's home, it was, that didn't shock me. It felt very much the same reality that I have now. But what did reflect to me is the interaction with the older generation, and interaction with, especially with the older generation, but also just sharing space with people that you are not your family. And that suddenly was much more significant. The easy, the closeness, the touch with Elisabeth. I just go into Lee's room, suddenly Stuart comes in, we're here, we're there, no hygiene, dishes. Suddenly it felt like a memory of a different habits, a different life.
I'm wondering to what extent that filming process, the process of making the film, actually affected your relationship with the people that feature in the film. So to what extent does the act of filming, I'm thinking about, you know, the sort of ethics of documentary filmmaking, to what extent did that change or filter in some way your relationships? Or was it just simply a natural thing that you would be making a documentary of your experience? How did that affect the people that you were talking to and interacting with?
So I think both, you know, I think in one hand, I was curious and they knew I'm a filmmaker, and I wanted to film them. I didn't have a specific goal and they agreed. I said I want to film our house and our life, and I didn't have anything, you know, in particular that I expecting from them. And but obviously it, you know, it made us work together. It's like a project, you know. Maybe before if I wouldn't make this film, I'm sure that our relationship would be different. Maybe we would be even closer, or maybe we wouldn't be less close, you know, maybe we wouldn't know each other that well. It's hard to know, but it definitely affected, because I was much more alert to them. I observed them different. I was curious. I was also reflecting on one from another. And I think, you know, that was also from the beginning the inspiration. I just thought that the combination of 4 people from different places living together, and in the beginning it also looked to me like some kind of abstract family, like me and Lee are the children and Elisabeth and Stuart are the parents. You know, it felt like some kind of a completely different puzzle. And but everybody was so compassionate to one another, so natural with one another. So that contradiction of that we actually don't belong to one another, but the fact that we live together, we share some responsibility. And I was hoping that I could capture that.
Is it possible to come in here, because we've had several questions in the chat and I think they kind of relate to what you've been talking about. One comment is that they talk about the camera remaining static, and they found it very powerful and also very special, as they hadn't encountered something like that in other films. And this person was wondering if you could kind of talk about this technique and your thoughts behind it. And related to that, the next question was, and again, you was talking a little bit about it just before, but when you realized when you had the story to tell, you know, what was the moment when you understood, okay, this is what you know, I want to convey? So let's start with those 2 questions.
And I think I can also like put them together. So this is also a story about someone making a film. And as I said, you know, in the beginning, I was just curious. I was inspired. It started with Lee. Lee was my first character. He was the one that I had the most interaction with. And I found it pretty amusing, and but in a good way. I felt it's very refreshing how 2 foreigners in a foreign land unite and share information, and always in the kitchen. So I thought, you know, maybe it could even be like a cooking film or something like that. We're always in the kitchen. But once I started interacting with Elisabeth, I definitely felt that we have a unique bond, and our vulnerability also, because Lee, you know, he had his own life, and, you know, he was more independent, and same as Stuart. But I think I was more vulnerable and lonely, and Elisabeth was more vulnerable and lonely at the house. So we, you know, the stars brought us together. But when I start filming Elisabeth, it was quite challenging because I was the only person, you know, I was also the cameraman, I was the sound man, and I was also, you know, trying to interview her, the director. And as you saw, Elisabeth was very much bossing me around, and the first scene, basically the first scene that I really filmed her was in the living room with the pillows in the sofa. And when I watched it afterwards and I showed it to a friend, to a colleague, she said, you know, this is so interesting to watch. You know, that is part of the film. Part of the film is how you're trying to make the film, and because you are one of the characters and you're a filmmaker, you know, this is part of the story. So in a way, I said, okay, maybe I'll just devote to it. You know, I'll make it part of the style. I won't resist to it. You know, because in films we always try to create some kind of illusion of a reality, and to create another world that you forget that this is a film. And then I said, but it's so much I'm so much part of the film. Why don't I make it part, like that would be part of the story, how I'm trying to make this film. And it worked very well with the story. So then it also gave me a lot of space in just putting the camera, and in contradiction to what I said before to Kim about the emotional narrative. So there were all kinds of different materials that I collected, or images. There was the images that were like more my deep, you know, my personal point of views about just, you know, the landscape or the architecture or whatever. But there was also the story, and there was just, you know, Elisabeth and just people, how they are. And I didn't need to do anything, you know, I just needed to turn the camera on, and, you know, her, the way she moves, the way she looks at me, the way she looks at stuff. So I didn't have to do anything just to collect that. And I don't know if it answers. So it was kind of, the film was made very ongoing. I didn't have a plan. I was shooting every week, and I was editing while I was filming. So I learned it while doing it. I had different kinds of materials, and in the end, in the editing, I decided, okay, what could go together, what can't, how will it be developed? You know, it starts pretty clumsy, and then it goes and becomes more and more stable.
I'd like to come in and just say there that I think that we've talked about this before as well, that I think that I'm glad that you mentioned the element of clumsiness, because it seems to be part of the film's authenticity. You know, we talk a lot about authenticity in documentary filmmaking, and it's sort of, it becomes something that doesn't really mean an awful lot. But I remember thinking at the start of the film that there was something quite honest. I think it's partly this clumsiness at the start that really drew me in, and made me feel like I was part of this community. I think it's also the honesty that really sits at the heart of the film. And when we spoke the other day about, you know, in many ways it's a film that if you wrote it down on a if you sort of mapped it out as a sort of script, it sort of shouldn't work. It's a film that really on paper shouldn't work, but yet in reality it works incredibly well at tapping into the spectator's own sense of belonging or connection with other people without it being explicit. Everything in the film seems to be very implicit, and it's the subtlety and honesty that I think is quite profound in the film. I've spent quite a lot of time trying to put my finger on exactly how that film moved me in such a way, because I felt quite disarmed at the time.
Yeah, and I would also maybe add one more thing about the clumsiness, that I mean, you know, it's not that it's artificial. You know, before when you asked me about the images, like you know, it's not like I'm inventing anything. That I'm collecting things, and then I have to figure out, what would be the best way to express something that I felt before. And I think the clumsiness was also very much a metaphor of how I felt with Elisabeth, because I was quite intimidated from her in the beginning, because she was old, and she was very formal, and she was very serious, and she didn't look for a friend in the beginning. She quite wanted things to be very, in order. And because I didn't really understand anything what's going on, I just arrived. I was not sure where things are in Durham, in the city, and in the university. So everything was very clumsy to me. But while I settled in, and with her feeling more comfortable with me, I could leave the camera. I could just put it, and then the film becomes more stable. And so it also reflects my clumsiness and my place in the house.
It's actually, in fact, those like moments in between that take on such importance. I love the fact that the film really interrogates the moments in between the encounters, and that you're brave enough to leave the camera running at times when most people would switch it off. And I think that's a real bold gesture in documentary filmmaking, or indeed any filmmaking, to have faith in those spaces between, or moments of transition. I'm wondering if there are any other questions, because I'm aware of the fact that we only have a few minutes, and I don't want to dominate.
We do have quite a few questions, but I'll rush. Actually, I mean, they're sort of a piece in many ways. So there's a question around the showing of empty spaces, and the questioners is just wondering about the idea behind the showing of empty scenes, and what it is to kind of hear a character but not see a character. Then there's a question from Matthew, who loves the imagery that you have regarding life, death, and friendships represented in the cat and the planted flowers. Additionally, they thought that the passage of time shown through the window at different times was fantastic, and wondered if you could speak more about how you kind of found and chose those images of those images to develop the story. And there's another question which I think is of a piece with this lot. Around the emotional narrative, which is what you've been talking about, Kim, and this questioner asks about, or makes the point that it's a very emotional narrative rather than a regular one, and is asking what kind of influenced you to take that particular direction. So about empty spaces, about your choice of imagery, and then what has influenced you in that emotional direction, or that affective direction that we've been talking about.
The only thing I'm not really sure I understood about the empty spaces. Well, I
suppose it's when you're looking. You were sort of talking about it when we're looking at the wall, and or the window, and you're talking to your mum, and so we hear these voices off camera, and we're looking at empty spaces.
So I think this is how it happened, this is how it was. I was in the room, and I had a camera, and I had the bed near the window, and I was spending a lot of time in the room. And the window was a very significant part in my time in the room. I was staring a lot, I was looking a lot at the window. So I think, as for everyone, when you are spending some time in a certain space, so this space becomes, has more meaning, and that would be a part of your memory, because I was documenting my time over there. So, and I was also, I was new. So I was like, I looked at everything in fresh eyes. So I saw the seasons changed. I didn't have a car. I was living in the suburbs. So the winter had a lot of meaning for me. And same as talking to my mom. I was talking to my mom almost every day, and I decided I will record all our conversations already from a very early stage. And I made, in a way, the conversations with my mom like a diary. Like afterwards, when I edited and I wanted to understand better, because then it was a long time afterwards, so I listened to all the conversation, and I kind of had, again, I had the experience of, okay, what happened to me that year and how I reacted to things and how things were evolved. And when I was talking to my mom, I was staring at the window. I was in bed or in the sofa, so it was just I was looking for a way to share what I went through. So and again, with the white wall, or with all the other things, all the other images, and I collected a lot of images, clips of just of the chair and the fan and stuff like that, because I was just it was such a significant time for me to be there and to go through all this. I first time in the States, and all this friendship and all this loss, so I was very emotional, and I was in that house. So then, I looked at the fan, and I felt like the fan is looking at me back, So I said, I wonder if I could, document that. But then, I thought maybe if I show it to other person, it will be just like, oh, that's just a fan. I wonder if I will able to do that transition and to make you feel like how I felt in that room. So I kept searching, I was just, like you look, like that's why I think it's very much like an essay. You're looking for the words, the specific, the most exact words that actually express what you feel inside. So I was looking for those images that I saw and how it affected me. And the white wall, it was just, it was some kind of just a feeling of no escape, you're experiencing something by yourself, and that's it. And you're in the room and there's nothing. And I thought that the white wall would be, it was suddenly just very clear that this is like, that's it, it's me in the walls. And then with that, I also suddenly noticed my room is different. In the beginning, it wasn't my room. It was different furnitures, and it was Elisabeth pictures over there. But with time, I already put my notes, and I changed a little bit. So I said, okay, that's interesting how also the space changed so much. So that's why I wanted also to show that. So, I just filmed what happened.
We are coming to the end of our time, but before we do, I'd just like to ask the last two questions because they're interrelated, and they do relate to your kind of relationship with Elisabeth. Somebody said the intergenerational relationship connection between you and Elisabeth strikes me as something pure and very human, and also one that is often absent from our lives. So gleaning wisdom from our elders. So what was your thinking about that as you put it into the film? And related to that is another question around the more practical aspects of filming that, I suppose. This questioner asks about how you went about shooting the sequences showing Stuart and Elisabeth. Was there a discussion beforehand with them, or were they just up for the whole process without too many questions?
So I think I will start with the second question. I asked them. They were, they were very easy about it. I told them my intention. I said I want to make a film about home, and if it's okay that I will interview them, and they were very cooperative, and I think they enjoyed it and they wanted to participate. And so I was very straightforward, but also nobody knew where it's going. So I think I answered that, right? And as for the first question with Elisabeth, so first of all, I do have a special empathy. Like I have some, I think I have a, you know, there's people who really like cats and the people who really like dogs, who really like babies. I really like old people. So it wasn't like out of the blue. Let's say some of my friends, they were not surprised. They said, you know, I find I like a lot the connection with the other people. And I had grandparents from my mother's side, but not a very strong connection. And I definitely remember a moment with Elisabeth that she asked me if I have any grandparents alive, and I said no. And then she looked at me and she said, you know, like, you're here, I'm here, so let's just be like that. And it was just very. It just developed, you know. It's like, I think it's like when people talk about love or people talk about friendship, you know, when it works, it works. There is chemistry, and there wasn't something too much. There was not too much thought.
Okay, as we're coming to the end of our time, Kim, I just wondered if you had any sort of last minute thoughts that you'd like to share before we finish. Any last questions to tomorrow?
I'm just really enjoying this conversation, and we've spoken quite a lot about the film, and I just feel like I could continue talking about it for hours and hours and hours, and I'm learning more. And it's so beautiful actually to have the film opened up through other people's questions, and I really hope for a time when we can all come together again, and you know, we can organize a screening and be together in a room, and that is where my thinking is at right now. As Tomas speaking, I'm thinking of all kinds of other possible events and screenings, and it's just really exciting to be able to share it, even if it is online. It's really nice to have the film sort of reactivated for me, and hear Tamar speaking about it. So, you know, thank you to everyone for organising this event, to you, Janet, to you, Tamar, of course, for such a wonderful film and for speaking so eloquently about it.
Thank you, Kim. And Tamar, have you got any last words before we finally wrap up?
Yes, so I said in the beginning, but I wanted to say really thank you for the SF Film Festival for, you know, choosing my film and inviting me. Even though it didn't happen originally, it's still such a huge honor. And for the Birkbeck University and DocHouse for making this event possible. And just the connection with you two, the ability to speak about the film and to have now this access with the audience. Usually when you screen a film, when your film is screening, you don't have a possibility to have some kind of interaction with the audience. So I'm happy we somehow managed to do it. And yeah, I can't wait to go back to the real life.
Thank you so much, Tamar. This is, I mean, this is such a beautiful film, and it is a film that's kind of brought us together as well, which is part of its extraordinary journey. So I'd like to just wrap up and say thank you so much for the incredibly thoughtful and beautiful questions which people have asked. I'd like to thank Kim for her thoughts and kind of for sharing, you know, her questions with us, and for Tamar joining us from Israel. And I'd like to finally thank DocHouse for hosting this event. So thank you and good night.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Bye.